Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Ben, and I am so excited to chat with AP Canavan from A Critical Dragon, who I've been watching for so many years, talk away about fantasy and narrative on his channel. And so this is very exciting for me to get to pick his brain a little bit. So welcome to the channel, AP.
Well, thank you very much, Ben. Thank you for the invite. Thank you for the opportunity. And I'm looking forward to chatting about this. But you've been watching my videos for years. That at a certain point you go, enough's enough. I've heard you talk. Just cut me
I don't
off.
mind. I don't mind a little rambling. I always feel like I come away from your videos enriched, having learned a little something from an expert who's been reading fantasy for many more years than I have, since I've just kind of gotten back into it as an adult, maybe 6 years ago. And so you studied it, and I come at it from very much just kind of a fan perspective, and so I love seeing it through your eyes and seeing things a little differently.
Well, one thing I would say to that, we all come at reading and narrative and be it science fiction, fantasy, or whatever. We all come at it from our own perspective. And I'm not an expert. I have spent time. I think I probably need about another 40 years or so studying before I'd be comfortable calling myself an expert. I had a specialism and I loved studying it. But that doesn't mean that I become suddenly the arbiter or the this is how things are. Because you know yourself within any discipline, you put 10 academics in a room and there are 15 different opinions because we argue. And when it comes to literature, literature is art. And
Mhm.
we can talk about different criteria that we can apply. But even in the choice of those criteria, that is going to be a selection process. And we don't always agree on the weighting that we give things or which things that we pick. And then we can talk about what we like or don't like. And that is always going to be individual to ourselves. And then even how we understand literature, because it's the text doesn't change. The author creates a text, but every reader is going to interpret certain elements of that text uniquely because we all live different lives, we have different backgrounds, we grew up in different time periods and different cultures, we have different experiences. And that means that the because so much of this communication is decoded in our brains, the meaning we attribute to things and the weighting that we attribute to things is always going to be unique to ourselves. And so one of the great things about YouTube and social media, we get to discuss this sort of stuff with other people. We get to see how they see it. We get to talk about how we see it. And there can be huge overlaps in how we understand something, but there can be divergences. And that's the joy of being a fan of any type of art is the appreciation of that art and the sharing it with other people who love it. And it's rarely the case that, oh, that is wrong and this is right. It's rarely as cut and dried as that. But with anything, of course, sometimes it is. And it's messy and it's complicated and it's wonderful.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about just my own experiences with books recently, as I've been having this YouTube channel and making top 10 lists and tier lists and ranking books against each other and trying to figure out like what's really going on here, and is it just completely my own subjective experience with these that I'm basing it off of? Am I tapping into any sense of more objective quality or standards that these books are meeting? And I tend to fall heavily towards your side of things, where this is art. It's incredibly subjective. The standards we apply are subjective and personal often, and so I am interested in kind of exploring like why people then still kind of make sweeping judgments of quality, or why I even have a tendency to do it. I feel like it's almost natural for people to universalize their own experience, and um, and I'll see people, nodding to their subjective takes. They'll say, "Oh, like this is all, of course, subjective. It's my opinion." Like at the start of a video, and then they'll start saying like, "Oh, the pacing was terrible, the character work was weak, the the prose was not up to par," and they start making all these more sweeping kind of objective criticisms of the book, and I feel like a lot of us, including me, we we might intellectually recognize that a lot of these things are subjective, but then we also maybe deep down think that we have pretty great taste, and that we are able to sort of figure out what was high quality, what was lower quality, and so there's this interesting thing going on, I think, in a lot of book reviews, written videos, and the way we chat about it. And I've seen you talk about this, so I'm curious to hear you explore that a little bit.
Well, one of the first things is typically when we talk about, are we being objective or are we being subjective? We generally make a massive mistake, which is we think of it as two binary states. You are either objective or you are subjective. But it's a spectrum. You can be more or less subjective. And if you are less subjective, you're moving toward objectivity. But you cannot ever be 100% objective. And then people go, oh, well, if you can't ever be 100% objective, then it's all just subjective. Eh, Right. You're kind of missing, for me, I think that is missing the point. So if you think of this as an analogy, if you have pure red on one side and pure blue on the other side. Now, we know if you mix red and blue, you get purple. So where does
Mhm,
purple begin? Because if both red and pure blue are, let's call them objective,
mhm,
and purple is subjective, then if you have red that is 99.999999991 and the other bit is blue, it's no longer pure red anymore. There's a bit of blue in it. You go, oh, well, now it's purple. Now it's subjective. But it's closer to being objective than it is right in the middle where it's 50% red, 50% blue. And so you have this movement. Now, when we look at something, so let's say that you have a certain author that you love and you really enjoy reading their books. And you look at, for instance, their prose style, and you go,
mhm,
well, they used a lot of adjectives in this book, and that's bad. You go, why? Oh, well, because it's purple. It's purple prose. You go, right? Purple prose is typically when it is overly embellished. So there's a level of embellishment which is perfectly acceptable because otherwise it would just be a recitation of fact.
yeah.
There has to be some artistic expression. So
But then one person's purple prose then could be the other person's like, "Oh, I love this overly embellished, descriptive section.
no,
Like
but if it is
I could have done with
overly
more." Yeah.
I know, but if it is overly embellished, it is already too much. And
Mhm.
therefore, you cannot like overly embellished. You can like
Mm.
embellished prose, but you cannot like overly embellished prose. It's a bit like there was too much food, but I like lots
Yeah.
of food. You go, yeah, but there was too much.
Yeah, yeah,
But by definition,
yeah,
the expression is saying there was an excess that was not
yeah.
needed. And then people say, oh, but so good prose is the style of writing that is all that is necessary to tell the story and nothing more. And you go, okay, how are you defining story? Oh, and this is where the study of it gets is useful, but it also gets a bit complicated because people understand story in different ways. And again, because it's a communication of a text from an author through their narrator or their narrative point of view, the words on the page, the symbols on the page that we are decoding. But when people say that wasn't necessary for the story, and you go, how are you defining story? Oh, well, the narrative events. You didn't need this. We can talk about kernels and satellites. Kernels being narrative events that are absolutely essential in order for a causal link to be created, uh, leading from point A to point Z, from the beginning to the end. And for the sake of this discussion, but we're talking about linear chronological storytelling.
Mhm.
Right. So those are kernels. What are satellites? Satellites are incidents that occur that if you remove them, theoretically, you can still get from point A to point Z. But well, why have them then? They're extraneous. They're not necessary. But these satellite sections, these moments, these events can develop character. They can develop emotion. They can explore the world and deepen the immersive experience. And the idea that economy in writing means the most basic form
Mm.
is, again, a sort of false analogy. Economy in writing is the communication of the greatest experience to the reader using the fewest possible words to create that experience. And so that's not the same as it needs fewer words. If this sentence is 20 words long, it could have been shorter, yes. But if we had made it shorter, is it possible it would have communicated exactly the same amount of information? Well, no, we would have lost some. In which case, it's not more economical to have much shorter sentences, but then need more of them to get the same amount of information across. A longer sentence that does all of that is more economical in the long run because of the amount of information that's being communicated. So when we think of objectivity and subjectivity, if I said this is good because I like it, that is purely subjective. Like
Mhm.
there's no discernment. Uh, Let's put it in the case of a review. When you write a review, you're writing a review not for you because we publish them. So we're writing them for other
Mhm.
people to read, to share, and we could be sharing our experience or we could be sharing our opinion of something. If we are sharing our experience and it is rooted entirely in what we like and don't like, then the only people who will share that experience are people who have the same likes and dislikes. But we are all strangers on the internet. So that person, our reader of our review, is going to have to read multiple reviews that we have written in order to try and work out if their likes and dislikes and
Yeah.
our likes and dislikes kind of overlap. You go, okay, that's certainly one way to do it. And if you make it clear in your review that this is not an evaluation of the text, this is me talking about how I felt, because the focus there is on the reading experience, the experience that the reader had. And that is unique. The text is not unique. Other people can access the text. So if a review is of a book, then that's where we move further away from how we felt and we start more evaluative things. So you look at the level of prose and you go, right, is this prose, for sake of argument, transparent? So we can look at it and we go, right, this is how it is being done. Now, is it transparent or is it basic? Is it simple or is it simplistic? That still involves a judgment. But the more we read, the more we study, the more we experience different forms of writing, the better sense we have of
Mhm.
what is going on in writing and the better sense that we have about what is good or bad in those sort of general terms. But simplistic writing is too simple. Simple writing is, you know, very appropriate for certain audiences, but when we get to different styles of story, writing a gothic novel, and one of the ways to evoke the gothic is through the sumptuousness of the language to create that gothic
Mhm.
feel, to create the gothic atmosphere. And so, yeah, but I prefer straightforward prose. Right. But you do realize that this is a gothic. And what they are trying to do, what the author is trying to do, is evoke the sense of the gothic. Yeah, but I don't like that. This is bad. You go, no. And that's the disconnect because it's not that authorial intent overrides how we feel about books. But if a book is trying to evoke the sense of the Gothic through the language, regardless of whether or not we enjoy that or like that. We can still look at that and go, was the Gothic evoked through the language? Yeah. Well, this then is a good use of prose to evoke the sense of the Gothic. And that is regardless of whether or not we enjoyed it, because the enjoyment is our reader experience. The enjoyment is purely subjective to ourselves. The other is an evaluation of whether this technique has been deployed well. And it still involves an element of subjectivity because we
Mhm.
obviously have to gauge that against other forms of the Gothic, other examples of the Gothic. Who is doing it well? Well, this was poorly done. How do you know? Well, I've read X number of Gothic novels. I've read this, I've read that. That gives me a sense of whether or not it was cleanly evoked or well evoked. Or there's still an element of subjectivity because it is based on our knowledge, understanding, and experience in the thing that we are evaluating. And that for me is one of the big distinctions. There's a difference between a consumer review of something that has a function. This vacuum cleaner doesn't have great suction. You're like,
Mhm.
that's clear and easy to try and evaluate. And that's why, 5-star reviews for vacuum cleaners are, perfectly understandable. This was great, or it's very noisy. Like things that you can check quite easily.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but when it comes to the evaluation of art, then if we move into, well, I didn't like it, you're like, but I don't know who you are. And then someone will say, oh yeah, but the reason I follow so and so's reviews is because they share similar tastes to me. It- but you don't know that from the first review. You have
Yeah.
to have gone through multiple reviews to try and figure out if it was that one off on that one book, or if, yeah, they generally genuinely do share and overlap with a lot of your own interests and preferences.
And then
But
even then our tastes change over time. I would have been more attracted to more philosophical reads, right out of college, and now find myself, just attracted to more of the roller coaster thrill rides and for more escapist entertainment. And so yeah, our tastes are also constantly changing and evolving. And even from one day to the next, I could be wanting to have more of a profound kind of real life experience versus something where I'm able to completely almost dissociate from myself and live other lives in other places. And so we're always looking for something different, and all different books and even just within the fantasy genre are trying to do so many different things. And so yeah, I what you mentioned about eventually though we have to compare a current read to all the things we've read that might be in the same genre or trying to do something similar. And that's where I really value hearing your opinions and takes, because you've been reading so much for so long that you have all these points of comparison that I don't have. And it's a reason I actually loved uh, reading the movie reviews of Roger Ebert, because he'd been sitting himself down in a movie theater every day of his adult life, watching multiple films, the Hollywood films, foreign films from everywhere. And by the time, I'm reading his reviews in the 2000s, he's watched thousands of movies. It's basically everything that's out there, and so he's has all these points of comparison. And but in the end, how the current movie he's watching fits into all that and is a subjective judgment on his part, like, oh, this movie's doing something similar to this one, but maybe even stronger because I'm responding to it more strongly. But I think a lot of it comes back to that subjective experience in the end of how you respond to it. And because art is so just messy and personal and multifaceted. Like what's interesting, I want to just hear your thoughts on this, um, which is with movies. I think people are more able to just accept that there's all these different elements that play into our experience of it. There's the music, the script, the acting, the plot, the photography, and that our experience of the movie is this kind of mysterious compilation of all of these elements coming together. And with the books, I feel like it's almost similar. Our experience of a book is this very mysterious mixture of all of the different narrative elements, the prose, the setting, the narrative voice, the characters, the plotting. And we still feel like, I think, when we look at books, that we can really pick apart the different elements, that it was like, oh, the character work here that was weak for me, or the plotting, or the world building, or the prose. But I often think that it's the mixture of everything coming together that's either just transporting me, or for whatever reason not. And I enjoy looking back when I have those reads where I was not immersed and was not really transported and was not having any kind of emotional experience. I then look back and think, what was it like? And then I try to pick apart, like, "Oh, I think it was this, this, this." But in the end, I do think it was, if I feel like I can do that, it's me just kinda guessing wildly. I think it's much more mysterious than that, how all these elements come together and shape our experience of a read.
Well, there are a couple of really good points there because, like, for a start, reading in now, I'm going to make a very generalized statement here,
Mhm.
and I want to make sure that this is very generalized and it is not specific. But reading in general is more active
Mm.
than watching a film. In general, there are massive exceptions. But when you watch a film, you sit down and the film is projected to you
Yeah,
and
yeah,
you are a passive
yeah,
observer of this thing. When you read, you are actively decoding the information and then trying to visualize it, trying to
yeah,
understand it, because it's a symbolic scramble of things, black black little symbols on a white page that you are turning into in your head characters, emotions, actions. It's a whole complex process. Now, that does not mean that we are entirely passive when we watch films, because you're still decoding what is going on,
mhm,
but you are less active in that than when you read. At least I think so. And so because of that, yes, we have all of these distinct elements. We have it in film, we have it in TV, we have it in all in books, in radio plays, in stage plays. There are all these different elements. And one of the things that we get taught quite early is, okay, we're going to look at this one thing. And we artificially take it out of whatever the
yeah,
completed
yeah,
narrative is to try and analyze it, because it teaches us how to focus and how to think about that one element. Because if someone said, right, here's a book, now give me a complex analysis of all of the things, you're like, but I don't know what each of the different things are. You have to start small. You have to start with these discrete units. But all art is more than the sum of its parts.
mhm,
So the relationship between these things and how each of these things bleeds into the others and supports the different elements, that is also part of it. And so, yes, as a starting point, we could look at an analysis of a scene and do a close read of the scene, and we're looking very specifically at language. But that scene has scenes that come before it, scenes that come after it. The character in that scene has had development before, will have development after. What happens in that scene, what happens in that world has a resonance because of things that were established for and things that were established after. So when we take the scene out to look at it, to break it all down, to look at these things, we always have to remember that's artificial,
mhm,
because we're ignoring context, we're ignoring where it is situated. But it helps us break down and understand certain elements. And then we put the scene back. From what we have learned from analyzing that scene, we now think about all of the rest of it and say, do those lessons hold true? Can I see repetitions of these things? Um, that one sequence, the character did this. Is that in character or out of character? And it's not, and again, one of the things that, quite often we do, particularly in the modern age, that's not how I would act. You know,
yeah,
that's probably a good thing,
yeah,
because, like, we didn't grow up in that secondary world
yeah,
that has a completely different ethos and technology and ethics and morality and a different way of living. And all those things are factors in how we think. Like, you understand that we're influenced by how we grew up. You've heard of nature versus nurture. But quite often we project what we think. This is how this should happen because this is my understanding of this
Oh.
situation. And of course, that that could be radically different to how the character acts, but the character could
Mhm.
still be acting within character, within the range of possibilities that a human character could have in response to that situation. It mightn't be the one that we think is most probable or the one that we would do,
Mhm.
but is it within the range of possibility? Like, did that occur in history? Yes. Well, if it occurred in history, then the author might have known about that thing occurring in history and therefore has done that. Yeah, but that they shouldn't have done that. Well, why?
But why
And
do we even need it why do we even need it to be realistic in the first place? Why couldn't it be inorganic, or more alien from our understanding? Like, let authors, do all sorts of creative things that, we don't need to be imposing certain limitations on them or the types of stories. I'm always seeing people, especially feeling like making these criticisms about, it's not realistic or didn't feel organic, and I do think it is a little bit of people applying what they would have done in those situations and kind of not being able to get outside themselves, but also just wanting things to maybe, almost applying a standard of realism that we don't really need to be.
but so many of these things are rooted in something that is very important, which is like a sense of authenticity, a sense of believability. Because when we read
Mhm.
science fiction and fantasy and a lot of horror, a lot of the speculative fictions, there is a suspension of disbelief. Not we have to actively work against, but that's not how it would work in the real world because we're reading narrative, we're reading fiction, and in fiction, things are going to be streamlined. There are going to be conveniences and contrivances that we have to accept because the world has to be simplified in order to tell a story in a certain number of pages. For the most part, again, there are going to be exceptions, but I want to talk uh, a little more generally. So, with that simplification, and oh, magic exists, healing exists. Well, very few authors have the ability to thoroughly work out what the ramifications are for something that doesn't exist. So, oh, there's healing magic. Well, how does it work? If I cast healing magic on someone with a wound, but they also had a cancer, is it suddenly going to make the cancer grow more? You, no, people don't think of that. But you drink a magic potion and it heals you. How? How does it make your bone that is broken like this
Yeah.
suddenly do that? Because you would need to put it back in place so that it can now grow together if it's
But yeah,
accelerated your healing.
but those things just aren't gonna kick most people out of their immersion because they're not gonna think of those things, and it's not gonna cause them to lose their suspension of disbelief compared to maybe
Because
some other things
yeah,
writers might do.
and so we sort of go, well, yeah, but that doesn't have to be realistic. Okay. So if that doesn't have to be realistic, why does that thing have to be realistic? Oh, because that's not how a character would think. Right. But part of this goes to, yes, authors, when they are communicating a story, when they have created this narrator, this narrative perspective, and this story is being told to us for whatever reason that they are doing it, because there are lots of different reasons, there are lots of different ways of doing it. There is a contract between a general sort of contract between author and reader. We, as reader, sort of agree to suspend our disbelief as long as the author tries to meet us halfway. But if we go into a book going, well, you have to make me suspend my disbelief. Some authors can still do that, even though we are aggressively resisting it. And that's an incredible feat. But most authors aren't doing that because there's a tacit agreement. We will try to understand the story on its terms. And in the modern day, we don't like giving up uh, any of our sort of autonomy to the fact that, oh,
Yeah.
its terms? No, no, I want it on my terms. It- so if you think of all of those threads where I'm looking for a story about um, shark people who can fly and there's enemies to lovers, but no insta love. Recommend that book to me. You're like, no, go away, go and do your own research for that very specific thing that you want. But we we have this whole thing that other people should go and do the work for us instead of us doing it. And it's kind of the downside of a lot of social media. Instead of bringing people together, it's viewed as a crowdsource for
Mm.
go and find the thing for me or go and do my thinking for me. I want to be entertained. All books should entertain me. No, you're not the only reader in the world. What entertains you may not entertain me. What entertains me may not entertain you. We are all aware of this fact. We know we are all unique readers. We know we all like and dislike different things. We know we have these different perspectives. But when it comes to, well, this book is bad. Why is it bad? Well, I didn't like it. It was too slow. What do you mean it was too slow? Well, it was just a bunch of people sitting around talking, right? And why is that bad? Well, it was boring. Well, what were they talking about? Doesn't matter. It was boring and it was bad. And could the author could have made it shorter and focused on action sequences and have people stabbing each other in the head. But quite often that's where I tune out of a lot of stories because I've read battle sequences and they unless they're done in an interesting way or have something interesting to communicate, it's quite often devolves into mindless spectacle. And that was fun when I was younger and hadn't encountered it as much. But now that I've read a lot of it, that doesn't hold my interest the same way. It, like the MCU movies. One of my favorite endings to an MCU movie was the first Doctor Strange movie. The reason being, Doctor Strange wins by losing repeatedly.
Mm.
It wasn't a big he's going to punch Dormammu in the face repeatedly and then they're going to have this big fight. It was no, he just gets killed over and over and over and over again until Dormammu's like, just go away. I don't want to keep doing this. I'm bored. Stop it. And for me, that was so innovative and so interesting because up until then, like a lot of the MCU movies had they set up an interesting story. There was a bit of development in the middle. And then the last third was building up to the hero having a fist fight with someone. And quite often I checked out because it was just
Yeah,
chewing gum for the
yeah.
eyes.
Same, same. But how do you then balance that your own personal experience when you're editing someone's book, let's say, and your goal is to improve it, for they're executing their vision um, better and reaching their audience in a stronger, deeper way. But a lot of their audience might not be tired of long action scenes. They might have done a lot less reading in the genre than you have. And so, are you when you're editing, are you reading differently than when you're just reading on your own for pleasure, where you're
There,
thinking more about what'll work for their intended audience?
there is a bleed over, but when
Mhm.
I am reading for pleasure, I'm doing that. I'm surrendering to what the book is doing and just go, yeah, just let it wash over you, follow along. There are still things that will kick me out of the reading because I go, ooh, that, or didn't you just say like 3 chapters ago this thing and now you're doing that thing? But you've worked in various educational
Mhm.
institutions, and a student hands you an essay, and they're making an argument about something. Now, their argument is entirely contrary to yours, but you don't mark it lower because they argue a different point. What you're grading is their ability to make the argument.
Yeah.
But how can you do that? If you believe X and they believe Y, how could you possibly, be fair? Because it's not about the conclusion, it's about how they did it. And I might disagree with a bunch of the points, but if the points are supported with
Mhm.
citations, if the sentences are clear and accurate, if they have a logical structure and flow, a whole load of things that you can more closer to objective than subjective that you can analyze and improve. You go, yeah, like it's possible to do it with essays. It's possible to do it with speeches. It's possible to do it with lots of things, including books. That just because someone has written a story that I wouldn't necessarily have picked up, you go, yeah. I am going to go through it. Okay, you're in this scene. You have three knights speaking, and one of them uses a very modern American vernacular expression, but the other two are prithee, verily shalt we, blah blah blah, and then the other one's like, dude, what are you doing? Y- Do you realize that that sounds out of place? And then, when you speak to the author and they go, right, but I'm deliberately doing that with that character because that character is from a different part of the world. And you go, okay. So what you then need to do is signal earlier
Mm,
on that people from that part of the world have an odd way of speaking. That way, the reader doesn't immediately go from pseudo medieval thee and thou speak to Californian surfer dude and go, what did the author have a stroke? That so it's are the breadcrumbs there to create the effect that you want to create, or is it suddenly a shock? And they go, yeah, but I want that shock. You go, okay. So the downside to this shock is X. The upside will be Y. You want them to have the upside. Is there a way that we can tweak certain things earlier to maximize the number of readers who read
mm,
this to have the Y experience rather than the negative X experience?
mm,
That's what you do as an editor. You're not trying to get them to write the book that you want. You're trying to understand what an author is doing with their work, what they are trying to communicate, and you're trying to help them do that in the most powerful and effective way possible. If they have an action sequence, you go, this is a great action sequence, but it goes on for 7 pages unrelentingly. If during this action sequence, this bit here, you can have one of the characters pause and hide behind something, have a breather. That gives your reader a breather, a
yeah.
moment to take a space to think about all of the stuff that's just happened, for the character to catch a breath, for the reader to catch a breath, for the action to sink in. Because remember, someone is reading this, and therefore that takes time. It takes time to process, it takes time to think about. So you can you go, this is a natural point in this action sequence to take a short pause so that the reader can kind of catch up and catch their breath. Or you have, oh, this is one giant paragraph that lasts for 4 pages. Do you know how difficult that is for a reader to read? So if we go through this, are there places where we can break it up into separate paragraphs? Are there places where we can have a short dialogue exchange, because that varies the type of reading that the reader is doing, that they've moved from exposition and description into dialogue, maybe a bit of action. You
Mhm.
find ways to blend them. And it's not whether or not I'm going, yeah, but I don't like this character. It- that's irrelevant. Whether I like or
Yeah.
dislike the character is irrelevant. I'm trying to see how the character comes across and what is being communicated by that character. And again, every editor is different. Every editor works in a different way. Every editor will have a different perspective on things. But there will be, if you took the same book and gave it to 9 different editors, they will not all note exactly the same things. But I think you would be surprised by the significant overlap in what they see as the
Mm,
major problems, minor problems, things that can be tweaked. They'll have different ways of potentially fixing it. And those are suggestions to the author to get the author to think about it so the author can come up with their own way to do it. But most editors, I think that if they were all looking at the same book, the big things they would agree on, and they would go, right, this is a very slow section. So they might talk about pacing, that you've gone
mhm,
from narrative event, breather, narrative event, breather, long period of no narrative events. Right. You have set up an expectation of this narrative event and then taking a breather, narrative event. And fine, you want a slightly slower section, but this is long. This is a third of the novel where nothing happens. Like, things clearly happen. There'll be dialogue, there'll be something.
mhm,
But if you've set up an expectation with pacing, you go, okay, can you insert somewhere in here and minor action sequence, something interesting happening, because that will help alleviate the perception that nothing is happening. It's a little bit now. Different editors might suggest, well, insert two small things, or one here, or one there and there, or they might say, actually cut that a chunk of that out because that will reduce the size of this slow section. There are different tools and techniques that you would use, and we don't always agree on which would be best. But all of the editors would go, yeah, this is a long, slow section. And this book is intended for a younger audience who is looking for an immersive, quick, enjoyable read. Therefore, having a long, discursive, slow section is going to be antithetical to the
Mhm.
goals that you want for your audience. How do we fix this? And have different things. So they agree on the problem. We'll have different solutions to it based on who we are and what the particular narrative is. But
This is this is fascinating to me about just, finding the problems, because this past year I was asked to beta read my first ever book. I had really enjoyed the author's first self-pub debut, and it seems like I was, right in that target audience, and the second book did some time jumps and went in a completely different direction, just a very different kind of plot and story, and it just did not click for me personally nearly as much as the first book did. And uh, then I was giving the feedback, just kind of giving the feedback of my experience, and for me, this was, if I imagined, if the characters had didn't feel as organic to how they had been set up, like after through the time changes, and I went through a couple things that I thought, I didn't feel kind of organic to the characters that had already been established, um, and went into a few other kind of narrative choices that I was like, oh, I think I would have like this, set up differently, or done a little differently. I was trying to figure out what was not working for me. And then the author actually added in a short chapter of the two main characters interacting before a lot of the plot ended up happening in the book. That made those changes feel a little bit more organic to them. So I
mhm,
think my feedback did end up changing the book a little bit, um, but most of it stayed the same. And then almost universally, everyone that liked the first book ended up loving the second book, and so my experience was kind of an outlier, and I'm glad the author, didn't go back and change a lot more based on my feedback, and so it was interesting for me to see, like, oh, even though I felt like I was the target audience, and based on my experience of the first book, and um, I was definitely wrong on what would work or not work for the fellow fans of the series. It was just my first experience, giving editorial feedback, and so it's just fascinating to hear you discuss it. And I'm wondering, with my beta read experience, if I was kind of reading against the text. I've heard you talk about this, reading with the text, reading against the text, and I feel like I just wanted a repeat experience to what the first book was, and it wasn't that kind of series where it's just kind of a similar kind of plotting or story being told over multiple volumes. The second book really went in a completely new direction, and I think I was reading a bit against the text because I just wasn't getting what I had loved from the first one. And then, I was needing to give feedback and trying to balance my own personal experience with what I think, might have been general issues with the book's execution, and so I was having difficulty with all of that.
well, beta reading or alpha reading or advanced reading for someone and editing. Again, there's an overlap, but they're not quite the same. Um, because obviously I've done both, and everyone does them differently. Authors have different expectations and agreements with people who see their work in advance for the kind of feedback that they want. When like the experience that you had, you told an author, I had a problem with this. Where did this, like, say for instance, something happened? You go, where did this come from? That doesn't seem organic to the character. So you flag, I didn't like this, and this is why I didn't like it. Now, the author is under no obligation,
Mhm.
either with an editor or with an advanced reader, to go, oh, I must fix that. The author is telling their story, but it gives them more information. They look at you as a reader who liked their first book. Why did Ben trip up on that? Why did he think that that wasn't organic. That comes from, and they'll go back through and they look to see the thing and they go, maybe it's this section here. If I have a tiny wee bit more here, that makes that aspect of their personality a wee bit clearer, then Ben would never have had that effect. He would have understood the character a bit better and seen this as a more organic reaction. And so the feedback from advanced readers, it's not the worst feedback in the world. I don't like this. This is boring. Or like, yes, but why? And it's not that there's no value to it at all. There's obviously some value, but it's not just this was boring or this was bad or I didn't like. If you explain why, then the author can go, yeah, but I want you to really hate the character in this moment.
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
want you to be pissed off at the character. So you're going, well, this is terrible. I hate this. Why is he doing that? I didn't want him to do that. You go, and the author is sitting there cackling, going, "Ma, you're falling for my plan." Because that's exactly what they wanted you to
Mm,
feel. Authors are always and should always be in control of their narratives.
mm,
That's their thing. Editors give suggestions. Editors suggest changes. Editors suggest ways to reshape or refine. They explain why. And these suggestions are based on, again, assumptions made about readership and intention and what the author seems to be trying to do with the text. And where how are these assumptions made? They're based on experience. They're based on interacting with people. They are based on all of the other books that you have read and all the other books that you have edited. You build up a library of experience. You understand how that technique works and whether it works for a general audience, whether it works for a very niche audience, like is it going to be like an in joke? There are all these sorts of things that you build up in your experience.
mhm.
But as an editor or even as an advanced reader, you can never guarantee how an individual reader
Yeah,
is going to
yeah.
perceive something. You could make a probably a good estimation about how a general readership for the given audience that the book is being aimed at is going to respond. But then somebody, oh yeah, but that's not how I felt about the book. You're like, yeah, individual reader.
Yeah, exploring the of a kind of readership's experience of a book that has a lot in common is really interesting. I just want to explore one of these examples for a little while because it's so fascinating. It's the only the only series I've seen in kind of modern SFF where seemingly the majority of the huge fans of the series ended up just hating the final book and the way the series ended, and that's with the Lightbringer series by Brent Weeks. And because I had a particular experience with the end of that series. It felt disjointed, and I lost my suspension of disbelief. And but then it seemed like a vast majority of the huge fans of that series also felt the same way. And I think as an editor, you're probably hoping to head that kind of thing off at the pass, where if
Yeah,
a lot of people are going to have these same issues, where you'd set up a whole secondary world fantasy with its own politics and in-world religions, and then right at the end, it becomes an actual like obvious Christian allegory, then that's going to throw off a ton of readers. And maybe Weeks was okay with that and fine with that, but he then seemingly alienated a huge amount of his fandom. People who are like me, enthusiastic to ever try another Weeks book, just because I have no trust that my time spent or a long journey is going to be be a satisfactory payoff. And so I'm curious, just because you've read that series as well, like uh, would you have done anything differently or suggested things done differently there?
oh yeah. But
Oh,
this what reader in the world has ever read a book and been, yep, absolutely perfect, no notes, wouldn't change a single tiny iota of difference to anything? There's usually, well, maybe a wee bit more of that, a little bit less. Once we start thinking about it, we always come up with things that we would change. But with the Lightbringer series, One of the issues with series that you typically don't get in like a single book project, um, a single book, you have beginning, middle, and end.
Mhm.
If you're editing a series, so let's say you get manuscript one and you go through and you make it the best manuscript one, and you send it back to the author, they get to do with it what they want, they publish manuscript one. Then a year later, you get manuscript two. So you skim back over manuscript one to remind yourself of what happened, and you edit manuscript two. But it could be 8, 9, 10 years after the first
Yeah.
manuscript, you're getting to whatever the conclusion is. And you get to this and go, is that where book one signaled it was going? Is that the direction? Is this suddenly going to be challenging for an audience? Was it ever building up to this? Were there signals earlier on? And authors can change their mind partway through a series about what they are doing. Even when you look at something like Jim Butcher's Dresden Files, there's a significant transition from an episodic, serialized,
Yeah.
case by case um, book
Mhm.
to building out a secondary world and a continuing story that is
Mhm.
evolving. Now, doesn't mean that there are no elements of that at the beginning, but the beginning is the first few books are very much case of the week. They are very specifically focused on that. The later ones are um, much more like a secondary world series where
Mhm.
these links are being built out and developed. But those are two different narrative styles.
Yeah.
Butcher
Yeah.
made a choice at a certain point to no longer be doing sort of episodic serialized narrative. But because it was leaning into a style of narrative that a lot of the readership wanted, it ties into that, and people enjoy it. You go, great.
Mhm.
But what if it had started as if it was going to be a long form story, and then halfway through suddenly became an episodic, case by
Yeah.
case, the case of
Yeah.
the week thing?
Yeah.
People would react badly. And, we talk about your promises being made to the reader. And, sometimes people talk about Chekhov's gun and they think it's a rule that if something is shown, it must. No, that's not quite, because it can be about subversion of that expectation,
Mhm.
because the author thinks that you have read other books and therefore might understand the concept of Chekhov's gun, and therefore is deliberately playing on you making that assumption so they can subvert it. Again, it's not that the rule is you must, it's this is how it's descriptive of a certain thing, how people
Mhm.
react. And again, focusing on why are you giving the reader extraneous information? um, the information given should support and build out the narrative being constructed. But as I mentioned earlier with kernels and satellites, a satellite can still be a constituent element, even if it is not necessary for the consequence and connection between causal events. That the satellite is extraneous to that, but it could be foundational for the rest of the narrative because it's an exploration of relationships or character or something. So
That's
when
another
we
that's another place where people have issues with Lightbringer series because book 4, Bloodmere seemed a little meandering. We were going off into this narrative satellite, and I was like, okay, I wasn't having the best time with it. It wasn't the most entertaining read, but this is probably important for things later. And then I read book 5, and there's all the hours I spent exploring these narrative satellites in book 4 didn't really weren't foundational or weren't necessary or any kind of essential part of the larger story. And so I felt cheated of my time from book 4 on top of not having the satisfying ending in book 5.
but here's a curious question. When you're reading a book, are you reading it to find out what happened? Because that is usually an element of why we read. But if that is the only reason we are reading, to find out what happened, why bother reading the book?
Mhm.
Just read a summary of the
Yeah.
book.
Yeah, yeah.
Because if that is the one thing that you want, I want to know what happens, then you can do that by reading a summary. You don't need to
Yeah.
read the book. One of the reasons we read is, yes, wanting to find out what happened is what compels us and drives us through the narrative, but we want to enjoy the experience getting there. So there was a fantasy series I read, and in it, they in one of the books, it jumped back in time to tell you what had happened that we'd already experienced, but from a completely different point of
Mhm.
view. And at the time, there were a number of reviewers on various fan sites. This is terrible. This is and they were getting really, really annoyed because they went back in time. For me, it was one of my favorite books in that series because the point of view was so fresh and refreshing, and I really enjoyed it. Did it propel the narrative events forward? No, but it supplied context for it, and I enjoyed the experience.
And
And
it made
then
use of
later on,
one of an author's most powerful tools with books that other forms of art don't really have it at their, available to them, like in film or TV, is point of view, being inside a character's mind, hearing their thoughts, seeing what they see and observe. And so, yeah, just being able to experience the same event through different perspectives is one of the coolest things I think an author could do. And yes, and yeah, but if we want to bring it back to the Blood Mirror, I felt like, there wasn't anything going on there that was inherently interesting in terms of setting or world building elements that were new and intriguing, or even learning about events through people's perspectives. Uh, and yeah, just I felt like I wasn't getting anything really of value through that, except for just like the events that were happening and leading up to even being unimportant for how things played out.
and that can be, it can be a struggle, because if an author has worked for several years on book one, and they've been polishing it, and they've thought about it, and they have a rough inkling where they want, if this ever gets picked up, I know where I want this series to go. But they've been working on book one for a while,
Mhm.
and let's say an agent gets it, and it gets to a publisher, and the publisher, right, do these fantastic. They get their edit done, and the publisher go, right, are you working on book two yet? You're like, oh, so they start writing book two, but they haven't had the same amount of time on book two. So maybe now, and I am not saying that this is always the case, but maybe when it comes to book two, they haven't had the time to polish it the way that they
Mm.
had with book one. They hadn't had the time to tweak it. So that gets sent off. And then they're working on book three. And they've, oh, if I could go back in time and change that thing that I said in book one, that would be really helpful. I've just had a brilliant idea about how to do it, but it contradicts something in book one. How do I get, and sometimes as series go on, it's not that the author doesn't have ideas, but it's trying to get, they have a contract now and they're writing to a contract. And usually publishers are quite understanding when books are late. But there can be that writing to a deadline and suddenly having to produce work to a deadline, whereas before it was a passion project. Now it's a job. And that can be difficult for authors. And so they go, I have this great idea. This is going to be, oh, and this is all great. And then they get to the next book and go, oh, I shouldn't have done that because now I need to do this thing. But when we read, and you had said that you did not, when you read the next book, you felt that you had wasted your time on the previous book.
Mhm.
But while you were reading the previous book, were you actively enjoying it? Because if you were actively enjoying it, then you didn't waste your time. But if you
Yeah.
weren't enjoying it, then why were you reading it? And quite often people go, "Oh, well,
Yeah.
I wanted to push through because I wanted to
Yeah.
see how the series would end." You go, "But if
Yep,
you
yep.
are no longer enjoying it, stop reading." Like, "Well, I'm gonna push through because I wanna find out what happens." Like, wait, the series will come out. You can read a summary. But
Yeah, and if you
this,
and if you've stopped really being immersed or enjoying it, especially if you've fallen off from a point of enjoyment, it's unlikely that the author's gonna grab you back in my experience. Like when I've lost that kind of feel of like, oh, I can get immersed in this narrative and really live inside the characters, and I'm interested in what's happening. When I've lost that, I've rarely ever been able to regain that with a book or a series. So yeah.
but again, like, that's not always on the author. Sometimes
Mhm.
that's us, where you've started a new job and you're stressed and you're worried and you're trying to do all of these things, and then you're trying to read at the end of the night, but you're not in the mood. You're going through the, yeah, you're reading the words on the
Yeah.
page, but you're not. You're too tired. You're not investing in it. And then as you settle down at the job or different things change,
Yeah.
you're much more settled. You're much happier. You pick it up. You're like, the book three is so much better than books one and two. You go back and look at book. Oh, actually, books 1 and 2 are pretty good. Oh, but that's only because it's a reread, and I already knew what was here.
Yeah.
But
That was
we
me with Toll the Hounds actually, where I read that book just the wrong time. I was reading all the books in a row, and I was on this kind of long family vacation and trying to read it in moments here and there, like throughout the vacation, and I was just not in the right mood or mindset to dig into such a dense kind of philosophical kind of read. And yeah, so I then did not have a great experience with that one. But I do want to talk maybe about Dust of Dreams because this is an interesting case study of a book where the things I'd heard about it, like, oh, it's one of the weakest in the series. It's just set up for the final book. It's an incomplete story. It's slow. It's a slog. I ended up having completely opposite reaction to all of the things that usually get said about that book, since I thought it told a extremely satisfying story, beginning, middle, and end. And sure, is setting up the final book like that bad of a crime in a long running series? So the fact that it leads into the final book wasn't any great negative for me either. But I found the book so thematically rich and coherent, and those slower sections where they're just conversations that soldiers are having on a boat ride down the river. Some of my favorite parts of the whole series. I just found that so immersive and those characters so interesting, and the things like the snake, like it's always people are always complaining about the snake, like oh, it's a really fun start to the book, um, but then it slows down. We get to the snake, and man, I just cannot deal with that. But I found the snake to be so emotionally evocative and something unlike anything I had ever seen before, and um, so so it's an interesting case study just because uh, two different readers and fans of the series can have completely different experiences of that book and criticisms or areas of praise. But then there's some objective things where it's like people say it's an incomplete book or that it's just like a volume one, but I feel like it has a very cathartic, clear
well,
climactic sequence and resolution. And so I don't even understand that kind of criticism. But it's just
well,
an interesting one to think about.
well, with Dust of Dreams, Erickson has been very open and even said at the beginning that unlike most of the other books in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, you can see there is significant narrative closure at the end of the volume, even though each is a volume in a larger story. From Gardens of the Moon and Deadhouse Gates and Memories of Ice and House of Chains and the Midnight Tides and the Bone Hunter, as you go through, each one has very significant, not complete, but very significant narrative closure. When we get to Dust of Dreams, there is some narrative closure, but not to the same extent because there's an element of a cliffhanger because it's this thing has happened. What's going to happen now? But you still have gone on a journey. There are still
Mhm.
things that have been developed, things that have been resolved, but it is building up to something else. And the end of the crippled god is significant narrative closure. So in looking at it, you go, yeah, it's slightly different to the rest in that there is not as much narrative closure at the end of Dust of Dreams that there is in the other books. People sometimes take that, and again, we do that thing where we take something that is on a spectrum and we go, there either is or there isn't. We apply these absolute binaries. It is either
Yeah.
subjective or it is objective. It is either good or it is bad. There is an in between. You know, it doesn't always have to be the extreme positions. Is there enough narrative closure for the average fan of the Malazan Book of the Fallen? And some people say, "Oh well, because there wasn't, I'm not going to read the last book." And you go, after reading all the first 9 books, you're not going to read the 10th one. Kudos, well done. That's that's more self control than I have because I would just go, oh, you know what, I'll just read the last one anyway. Um, because by that stage, I'm invested. Like there's the sunk cost fallacy coming into play. I've invested all this time. Let's see how it plays out. The bold strategy, Cotton. But we do have, and again, one of the complaints often made about Malazan is, oh, but it like why do you keep introducing new characters? Right, but why not? But it's a series. Yeah, yeah. So it should be follow. Did I hear the word should? What part of series means that you only follow a limited number of characters? Oh, well, that's what I'm used to in X, Y, and Z. Yeah, but if book one has a certain set of characters and book two goes somewhere else and has different characters, book three sort of goes back to part of book one, and there's the expectation for this series is that it is going to move around and is going to do these things. Oh, but it would be better if it just followed a central core group of characters. You go, but then it wouldn't be what it is. It would be an entirely different thing. And when you say better, you mean more like the other series that you have read. And if that's what you like, I can understand the feeling that it would be better. But that's not what the author was trying to do. That's not what we see happening in the series. It's not any of the promises that the series has made. These are independent volumes in a meta arc. That that's the promise. And that has been made good on and illustrated multiple times to this point. Oh, but I don't like that. Fine. No one is saying you have to like it, but saying it is bad, why? Because you don't like it. That and it takes us right back to the point at the start that
Mhm.
whether we like or dislike something, that can be valuable information. It's certainly valuable to us. It lets us know ourselves better as readers. And if you find out in trying to read the Malazan Book of the Fallen that you prefer stories that are more linear, that have a core cast, that have a travel log style narrative where they go from place to place to place to advance the plot in a linear, chronological, causally linked fashion, great. Go and find books like that because that will be incredibly rewarding for you as a reader for a while until you've read a lot of them. And then you might go, I need something different.
Does it
That,
surprise you at all though that Dust of Dreams gets the reaction it does among a lot of the readers? Because it doesn't seem to be a particular departure from the promises or the narrative style of the whole series leading up to it. Toll the Hounds, I think, is much more of a unique kind of narrative structure. And then I don't know, maybe like that book coming on the heels of Toll the Hounds uh, is a factor there, or just the idea that it is part one of the final duology. But I'm intrigued because I just feel like Dust of Dreams does all the things so amazingly that Erickson had been setting up and promising throughout, all the previous books, and to see it get the reaction it does is so puzzling to me.
it's one of the curious things, and one of the reasons why I'm such a fan of the Malazan Book of the Fallen series is that very few of the books are alike.
Mhm.
That they each of the volumes seems very distinct. It has its own personality, its own character. It's doing its own thing. You don't oh, this is just the same as that one.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of series I have read where you're reading it going, isn't this quite similar to that one? It's following the same structure. Oh, I bet in the next three chapters, this character is going to run. Oh, look, they did run into a problem within the next three. Oh, it'd be terrible if a villain suddenly, oh, look, a villain suddenly showed up. If only they had that magical object. Oh, look, they got the magical object. That we see patterns, and sometimes that can be very reassuring and comfortable. And it's what we want. We want those patterns shifted just enough, changed just enough to feel unique, a bit different, that it's not quite the same expression, but the pattern is there and we're comfortable with the
Yeah.
pattern.
Yeah.
And that is absolutely fine. We all have books like that that we love. That's great. But when a book doesn't do that, you go, well, that's just bad. It's like people who insist that the only narrative structure in the world is Freytag's pyramid. And
Yeah.
quite possibly because they took a English course once or a creative writing course once
Mhm.
where someone talked about narrative structure, and the one they went to, the one they showed was Freytag's pyramid because of its ubiquity across a lot of Western literature. And they go, that this is narrative structure. You go, no, that is a narrative structure. And it is descriptive, not prescriptive. What about the hero's journey? That's a narrative structure, but it's not Freytag's pyramid, is it? It's slightly different. What about Prop's morphology of the folktale, which is similar to the hero's journey, but slightly different and highlights different things? What about the three-act structure? You can impose a three-act structure on Freytag's pyramid, or you can take Freytag's pyramid and break the central section into three separate sections, each with their own rising and falling action, their own
Mhm.
climax, their own instigating event. You can have a look at the structure of a comedy, the classical comedy, or the structure of a classical tragedy. Those are different structures again, because structures, it's a way of describing how the narrative functions. But quite often we take a little bit that we know, we're so sure about it, go, but this is how it is meant to be, and we apply it prescriptively. But you get that literature is art. And that's like saying that paintings must be done in a certain way. And there'll be a whole bunch of artists will do it in that way. But
Mhm.
there'll be a whole bunch of other artists going, well, I'm going to do it this way. Because
Yeah.
authors, writers, artists of all types and descriptions, they start off and they go, I like this thing and I like that thing, but I'm going to change this thing to do it that way. And they experiment. And art has existed for thousands of years. Literature, which is actually, when you think about it, a relatively young discipline. Even like the study of English literature is an incredibly young discipline compared to a lot of the others. But we start with poetry. What is poetry? Oh, it's verse with rhyme, and it's an artificial meter and rhythm and all these sorts of things. And then someone says, oh yeah, but that's not true anymore. You go, no, but that was the initial conception of it. Then drama had an initial conception. And then, so what is prose? Well, everything that basically is not poetry or drama, because those were the defined categories. And prose was um, in everyday language. And people frequently say everyday speech and think that, oh, it should be how we speak. You're like, no, everyday language, the common rules of grammar.
Mhm.
That's how prose is constructed. And oh, but then prose shouldn't have poetic devices in it. And you go, the reason they're called poetic devices is that the study of poetry existed before the study of prose, because poetry existed before prose, so they were called poetic devices. Does it make it any better if I call it literary devices? Aha, I've solved the issue. You can now have literary devices in literature. Ta-da, it's magic. All I did was change the term and apply it to prose, because we use similes and metaphors, assonance, alliteration. We use all of these things in how we typically express stuff. So it is part of
Yeah.
everyday language. But when we were in school, we learned them as poetic devices, but we can just as easily call them literary devices. Again, we take a lot of what we know. And if we don't know what we don't know, if we're not aware of how much more there is to know, we can feel very, very confident that we know what we're talking about. And this is why at the beginning I said I need at least another 40 years studying this stuff before I would even dream of calling myself an expert. I know how little I know.
Yeah.
Um, and we can be very, very confident when we know at a time that this is how it must be. And yet, even in even in a genre like fantasy, and we take a subgenre of that genre, epic fantasy, and we take a subgenre of epic fantasy that's focused primarily on military fantasy. Even within that, the staggering amount of variation should give us pause before we say this is how series must function, or this is how stories must be told, or uh, this is the definition of the thing. Like in narratology, or an aspect of narratology, and not all narratologists agree on this, but I frequently use plot, meaning the sequence of narrative events as they are narrated to the narratee, i.e., the events as we encounter them in the text,
Mhm.
and frequently then refer to story as those narrative events reordered chronologically into a linear sequence so that the causality is more apparent. So that's story and plot from, and it's quite often why I define them, because story could also mean what is the general meaning conveyed by the narrative we have just experienced. So you could talk about Iron Man 2, and if you wanted a summary of the plot, you summarize what happens in every scene. If you want the
Mhm.
summary of the story, it's the sins of the father are visited on the son, and he has to reconcile with his past. There is a summary of story because it's looking at the underlying meaning and message that is communicated by the narrative. But that's a completely different definition of story. And you, but how can they have two completely different definitions? Congratulations, welcome to language. Even within the discipline, we have this where we have different parts of the study of literature will take the same term and have slightly different or variants on a definition, because we work in fields and subfields and sub-subfields, and we have experience of reading certain theorists and not other theorists, so we use those and replicate those, and then someone else introduces, oh, have you not read this by so and so? Oh, let me go and have a look at that. That's fascinating. So you talk about general terms and general concepts, but then when you get into the specifics and the nitty gritty within certain subdisciplines, you start applying them differently. And the more you find out about it, the more you find out that it's not concrete and definitive. It's it's fuzzy, it's flexible, it's not neat. There is a huge amount of bleed over, because anytime we think we pin something down, one of those sneaky, lying, clever little authors comes along and deliberately does something that breaks that rule. And you go, damn you. This was a really good definition until your work showed up. But that's what we love.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
2,000 years.
yeah. We have
That,
room for it all. We have room for all of the different experimentation and variety. Yeah, there should be room for it all and even more.
but it's like, so good. This is how you write a sonnet. And, was it 14 lines and it's A, B, B, A, B, B, the rhyme scheme, the number of syllables. And then someone else goes, well, what about this one? Oh, it's very similar to a sonnet. It follows, but it's slightly different. Well, okay, but it's close enough. We'll still call it a sonnet. And then they go, well, what about this? You go, right. And then by the time you've gone down the chain, you're looking at the thing at the far end where people have been messing with it and go, how closely does that resemble the original conception of sonnet? Ooh, they don't share an awful lot. But we look at these things and we go, oh, this is how this is. And then poets and authors and writers and artists come along and they go, yeah, you think so? Uh-huh. That is a challenge. Challenge accepted. And away they go. It's, you can't write a story without
Yeah.
characters. And if you have a look through some of the modernist and postmodernist short stories, yeah, you can.
Mhm.
Like, they're weird and wonderful, and they're more literary experiments, but you can have a story without
Yeah.
characters. Um the like very famous example of flash fiction is attributed to Ernest Hemingway, and it's 6 words: for sale, baby shoes, never worn. And that's it. And according to all of the definitions, that is not a story, but it implies a
Mhm.
huge story. And that story is going to be different for each person who is imagining it, because you're given those 6 words, but from that, you create backstory, you create the narrative events, you create the characters, you create the circumstances, you feel the emotion, you do all of these things. Those 6 words take you on a narrative journey. So, is that narrative? Well, there are no narrative events. There is no change. There are no characters. There is no setting. There's no scene. There's no world building. There's nothing. Then how can it be a story? You- Because the reader imagines the
Mhm.
story. And that's the problem with authors. They are crazy smart and they like messing with academics who have gone, right, we've come up with this definition. And they're like, haha, no, you haven't.
Yeah, speaking of rule breaking, I just read my first Guy Gavriel Kay book ever, A Song for Our Bone, and I loved it. I had a very powerful, kind of emotional experience with that book, and I felt just everything was working for me. I was invested in the characters and this medieval French setting that we were spending time in, which is actually the background of this video. It's from a song for our bone cover. And the imagery, though, it was he was using some more, I think, poetic language and imagery than I usually experience in modern fantasy and sci-fi, and it just kind of hit me at the right moment. But he's doing things that I haven't seen really other authors doing, which is very quick and not uh, clearly signaled POV switches, which actually I have seen. Erickson does that a good amount in Malazan. But he also was switching tense, which I didn't even realize. Someone pointed out to me later that he did some of the chapters that were set in the northern state, Gorho, in the present tense, which I didn't even realize while I was reading. I was just so immersed in it. And he also changed into an omniscient narrative perspective just occasionally in the middle of chapters, just kind of, seemingly at random. And a lot of times also at the end of chapters, it would kind of move away from that limited perspective of the character into some more evocative imagery of the nighttime or the weather. Um, and it just breaking some of those rules about sticking consistent to the perspective or the POV, and I worked beautifully for me, and it's just I was blown away by. And yeah, so I just brought that up as an example of an author just being a mad scientist and breaking rules.
But the one of the things about stuff like this, you have to know what these rules are. And by the way, the inverted commas on rules, they're not so much rules as things that other authors have picked up over time and said, if you do this, you generate this effect. This is one of the most effective ways to create this effect. Or this deals with an audience expectation about how the thing functions. So you have to be aware of that. It doesn't mean that you have to follow it, but you have to know what happens if you don't follow it. And if you know what happens when you don't follow it, and you are prepared for that, and you have planned for that, and that's why it is there, then you can manipulate the reader, which is the whole. A lot of the purpose of a lot of writing is about the manipulation and persuasion and the creation of effect in a reader. So if you understand what it is that you are doing and you are doing it deliberately, there is no guarantee it will work for
Mhm.
the general readership or even the individual reader. But you stand a better chance of getting it to work than if you don't understand what you're doing. So having a reason and a rationale for why you switch from, say, past tense to present tense. If you think, oh, anyone from this part of the world is when I am in their internal monologue, it'll always be in present tense, even if no one else is. And so you go and you do that because it's how they think. It's how they think of the world. They think in the present tense. You create that rule and you apply it consistently. Like you're not applying it inconsistently. And then you have a character who changes from being part of one culture to accepting and becoming part of that culture. And then you can signal that by earlier on having their internal monologue in past tense, and then you would have it in present tense once they have been assimilated into the culture. You go, right, so that fits with your rule. Now, if your reader is attentive, they will spot this. If your reader is inattentive, they'll go, hang on, their internal monologue was like that in the I know that's a mistake. It's inconsistent. And you go, the consistency is in the application of how. But we find this a lot with when you hear writing advice, quite a lot of the writing advice is either so general and vague as to be bland and not particularly useful, or really specific and good in very specific circumstances. So open your book with a hook. Okay, well, what's a hook? Well, anything that interests your reader and gets them invested. You're like, you mean like writing? Well, don't start with something boring. And you listen and go, what are you talking about? Something that interests my reader. Right. That's the whole point. I'm writing a book that is meant to interest my reader. Like, I'm not going to deliberately start with a really tedious section to try and put them off. Like, let me slowly explain to you how paint looks as it slowly dries for 5 pages, and then, ha! And then there was a battle. You're like, but you have these very bland things, and quite often they're taken from different types of writing, like presentations. Oh, with a presentation, start with a hook, end with a call to action. Oh, God. But
Yes.
um, if the writer understands what it is that they are doing, if there's an intentionality behind it, then there are lots of ways that they can be playful that are outside the expected norm. And because they are aware of what they are changing or what they are removing, because they are aware of what effect that creates, they can then add in something else that is balancing that or supporting that, or they understand what it is that they are doing. And the thing is, authors can strike it lucky in that they mightn't know, they just will write something, oh, and it just worked. I don't know why, it just worked. And then the next time they do it, they go, why isn't this working? I don't know why this is. If you understand a bunch of these principles and a bunch of these approaches and the effects that they cause, if you understand that, you can look at the writing and go, oh, that's why that's not working. Right. And it gives an author tools to fix the thing or to do something with it. Kay's writing, I love Guy Gabriel Kay's writing. I love the lyricism to it. I love the fact that language is very much part of how he expresses the narrative. It's a style of storytelling that I love. It's one of the reasons why I love Johnny Wirtz's The Wars of Light and Shadow. Again, paying attention to the language and how the language adds such depth and complexity. It's not just what you're being told, it's how you're being told it. And there are all of these different facets that support one another and add depth and complexity and color and taste and texture to this narrative. That's fantastic. At the same time, I also really enjoyed David Gemmell's writing, which is journalistic and
Yeah.
straightforward and quite sparse, because that was the style of narrative that he was telling. And that style lent itself to the story that he told, and it was enjoyable. Um, I wouldn't insist that everyone write the way that Kay does, or everyone write the way that Wirtz does, or everyone write the way that Erickson does. No, I want variety. I want authors to be able to find styles to explore and to play with and create unique visions rather than you must write this way. You're like, what? We don't live in a dictatorship. We don't say to artists, you must do this, because that's how you end up with an incredibly boring, incredibly staid, non evolving, repetitious genre where everything ends up a carbon copy of what went before, or,
Yeah.
AI, which is that's what it's going
Yeah,
to do.
yeah. I am finding now that I've read hundreds of books in modern fantasy and sci-fi, that the ones that are surprising me are doing things that, I haven't seen before or that I can't predict where they're going or the narrative beats, are the ones that are most satisfying to me right now. I just read this little trilogy that's obscure that I haven't seen a single other person talk about, which I ended up loving so much for how surprising it was the Empire of Salt trilogy by Khan Iggulden, and this is just
I,
a
I, I
little
haven't
a
read
little
I
trilogy
haven't
of
read
books
that
from 2017 to 19.
I haven't read that trilogy, but I've read a bunch of books by Con Eggleton.
Oh, yeah, because he
Uh,
mostly does historical fiction. So
yeah,
his publisher forced him to take the, extremely obscuring pseudonym, C.F. Iggulden, for this fantasy series. So he couldn't even capitalize, like, on his well-known, literary fame for this. So it's not a very well-known series. But one of the benefits of being in this BookTube community in the larger online fantasy fandom is, a friend will suggest something that was completely off my radar, and I had never heard a single thing about it, and went in and was just delighted. There was so much narrative voice and quirkiness to it, and everything was so unpredictable. Like, just things were continually happening that I did not see coming, or that I thought were different from what I was predicting, and that was so much fun. And then I then finished out the Rainwild Chronicles just a couple days ago with Robin Hobb's Blood of Dragons,
Mhm.
and I've been really invested in the whole realm of the Otherlings, but a lot of the plot beats and character beats in this particular book were easy to kind of see coming from far off, and sometimes that's okay. Like an inevitability can be satisfying and cathartic, but man, coming off of a series that was just so full of zaniness and creativity and just unexpected beats to go to that other book, it was jarring for me.
And again, a lot of it has to do with patterns and the things that we've experienced. And when we become good at certain patterns, we see them, and then we can start predicting things. There was a fantasy trilogy, and I read it years ago. And halfway through book one, I wrote down a series of predictions for what would happen in book two, but how book three would end. And I had a 9 out of 10 success rate. Did not mean that the books were bad. No, the books
Yeah,
were
yeah,
quite enjoyable, but you could see the foreshadowing. And from the foreshadowing and from the style of writing and from the types of characters that were involved, you could create a sort of probabilistic model for it's
yeah,
likely
yeah.
to resolve in this fashion. And if it's going to resolve in this fashion, then that knock on effect is that thing, which is going to create that thing. And you created the cascade. But does
You'd
that
be a
mean that I can?
literary Harry Seldon with his psycho history predictions.
But the other thing is, an author can be aware that we do this. I go, you think it's going to go that way. And so they deliberately put in those elements of foreshadowing that we think it's going to do that. And then they go, no, 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 pull the rug out from under you because they wanted you to think that at that point in order to do something different with it. And this is part of the game of authors, trying to balance our desire for something that is familiar but different and our desire for innovation but not too much change. It's this
Yeah.
constant tension, and authors want to innovate and change, and then there's things that they are comfortable with, and it's this constant backwards and forwards, and it makes it a joy because the next time I was reading another trilogy, and I went, oh, I'm going to do the same thing. How do I got 1 in 15
Are
because
you is that more satisfactory to you these days for you when it is that unpredictable?
yeah,
Oh, yeah.
but not unpredictable as in random. Like,
Mhm.
it's and this is the thing. It's I like being surprised, and yeah, it is. To be perfectly honest, it is harder and harder to surprise me for certain types of
Yeah. Yeah.
fantasy. Not all types of fantasy, not all types of science, but there are certain types of fantasy that when you get that new voice that is approaching it in a new direction, it you go, yes, this is brilliant because I was getting a little tired of X approach because the author that say in the 1990s or early 2000s was doing this and you go, wow, that's amazing, this is so fresh and innovative. And since then there have been 17 other authors that have
Yeah.
written in that style, and you've read a bunch of that, you go, yeah, okay, fine. Craving the new, craving the novum, craving the novel. And that that is part of the joy of reading widely and reading
Mhm.
broadly and seeing these different things is we we do away with the expectation that a book has to follow a certain thing.
Yeah.
Because take something that is very straightforward and I think most people can understand. If I said, right, you're going to write a murder mystery, and you go, right. So the first thing I have to do is, I'm going to establish who the detective is, and then the detective is going to be called to the scene of the crime, and then they're going to meet all of the people, and they're going to interrogate the people. And you go through it, and you almost in your head, you're thinking, this is how the Agatha Christie sort of murder mystery works. You look at how Agatha Christie did it, and then they go, no. Well, the first thing we're going to show is the actual murder and who did it. You can't do that. That's it. You go, Columbo did it, and Columbo ran for ages. Police procedurals do it, which is, and again, we start seeing it began with one style of storytelling, and then we get these different threads develop until they become their own style. And
Mhm.
but the idea that murder mysteries must follow a certain pattern, you go, no, there's a common pattern that a lot of murder mysteries follow. We're all aware of it. So is the author. And the author knows that we know about this pattern. And we know that the author knows that we know about this pattern. And let the games begin as to, are they going to follow it? Are they going to subvert it? Are they going to play with it? That that's part of the game of literature, and
Mm.
it's fun. And so
Oh
that's
man, it makes me want to just foist the Empire of Salt books upon you. They're less than 400 pages each. The whole trilogy, basically like 1,000 pages, just flies by. And there, I would love to just dig in um, and do spoiler chats on those books if I can ever convince you. But
but I
because
read a bunch
yeah,
of Con Eagleton books, and there's actually, for a lot of historical fiction, I think a lot of readers of epic fantasy and heroic fantasy
mm,
and um, military fantasy, there's a lot of historical fiction that scratches exactly the same itch. It's just,
yeah, yeah,
instead of it being on a secondary world, as in a completely different planet, it's a secondary world in that it's a completely different time period, and you, as the modern reader, are just as separated from this alien perception of reality as you
yeah.
would be in another land. And so there was
Except
a series of
they are working under the limitation of not introducing you know obviously supernatural elements or things that would have been you know seen as magical. Although there's
okay,
ways
but
that I've seen Cornwell do it in the Warlock Chronicles where the characters are kind of performing magic or what they believe to be magic. So there's ways to blur those lines. But I got the feeling like I haven't read any of Eagleton's historical fiction, but he's written books set in Mongolia or ancient Greece or Rome. But if you're writing historical fiction, you're kind of limiting yourself to historical reality a little bit. And I feel like Eagleton was just for 20 years publishing that stuff, and he'd been building up all of these fun ideas that he just let his imagination loose when he was finally able to write some fantasy, which is why it just feels like this series that's just bursting with so much creativity and fun ideas. Um, but but yeah, I guess there are ways for historical fiction writers to exercise their creativity too. But it was interesting to for this because I feel like he just with fantasy, there's no bounds, there's no limits on kind of you're not limited to realistic elements from our world.
but again, it has to be balanced with authenticity, consistency, and whether or not a
Yeah,
reader is going to suspend their disbelief. And depending on the author, depending on the type of book, we have different limits for that, and depending on the individual reader. But but like in historical fiction, if you go back in time and you have, well, I'm invoking Ares' blessing on this, and a meteorite has fallen out and landed on the ground. It happened to be an iron meteorite, but it has a lot of carbon scoring. So actually, when they forge the metal, it becomes steel at a time when other people didn't have steel. So this is a magical blade
yeah,
sent by
yeah,
Ares. You go,
yeah,
right. So if you have your characters and you're using a quite subjective perspective focalized through these characters, they believe that is magic. Now we, as the modern reader, are going, no, no, but it's just an iron meteorite that with carbon, so that's still like that's all it is. But they're going, it's a magical sword. It cuts through all of these things. So perspective is fascinating to play with
mm,
because depending on your interpretation of these ancient cultures and how you represent whether they were skeptical, whether they had literal faith, whether they had metaphorical faith in the gods, these are all practices that can be played with in different ways. The oracles at Delphi, did they actually have mystical visions? Or were they hallucinating? But even if they were hallucinating, were those hallucinations tapping into the collective unconscious and therefore were in some way prescient? There are all sorts of weird things that you can do with historical fiction without people going, well, that's not how reality works.
Yeah.
Congratulations. A lot of how we perceive reality is entirely subjective.
Yeah. Oh, totally. No, that was one of the joys of the Warlord Chronicles for me with Bernard Cornwell is it felt like I was reading an epic fantasy series almost, and just because people believed certain aspects of supernatural world and in druidic culture, and that was really fun. It felt like I was almost living in a different world completely.
Mhm.
Um, and it's one of the
And
great joys of this whole genre of speculative fiction is this kind of remove we have from our reality and going on these trips where I feel like oh I can live new kinds of existences or lives that I can't just live here in boring suburban 2023 New Jersey or 2024 we're now. But no, historical fiction is I've been finding I've only kind of dabbled in it so far with Bernard Cornwell, but I've been finding it just incredible for scratching the same types of itches that kind of fantasy and sci-fi has.
and to bring us back to one of the things that we were talking about earlier, sometimes when we encounter something that is new to us, we can love it and go, oh, everyone should do this. But the thing is, other people might go, yeah, but that's standard in this thing. And that's actually not particularly innovative, but it's new to us. And so we
Hmm.
can see how our reader experience is rooted in our experience of encountering these things. And the newness of it makes it exciting. And then when we become familiar with it, we might become jaded. Now, the thing itself has not changed. So, if that thing has not changed, and it was brilliant the first time you read it, but not brilliant now, and it has not changed, what does that tell you? It tells you that your judgment that you were making was not about the thing, it was about how you felt. And an element of that will shape our perception and enjoyment and appreciation and understanding of art. That will always be part. But if we are setting out to tell people about what a book does, how it functions, whether or not they might like to read it, I don't know who my audience is. I don't know what my audience likes. So I find ways to describe how is the story told? What type of story is it? um, Whether or not the pacing of the novel, you have to understand how pacing functions, not just I was bored and therefore it felt slow. Congratulations. Again, that's not about the text, that's about how you felt. And all of us, all of us are on a journey to learn more. And
Hmm.
some people get to a point they go, I don't want to learn more, I don't want to go any further, that's a lot more work and I don't want to do it. You go, that is absolutely fine. Everyone is free to make that choice. But the thing is, you can't then say, well, because I don't want to learn anymore, then I'm just going to do it this way, even though I know I'm focusing on my reader experience and not the text. But I don't care, because learning how to do a talk and a review of an actual text is going to be difficult. That's work. I don't want to do that. So I'm still going to call what I do a review of the book, even though it isn't. That then is imposing your view on everyone else. And we have this.
Yeah,
re-
that does bring us full circle there. Thanks. It makes the idea of doing a review so intimidating to me, of feeling like
but
I have to, because I'm very in tune with my own personal reaction to the book. So I feel
yeah,
like oh, I was gripped throughout this section. I was having an emotional physical reaction here at the end. Like I'm confident that I'm reporting those kind of objective facts about my personal experience, but then much less confident about delivering more of that objective analysis about the book itself.
but somewhat it's a bit like, okay, to run a marathon you have to run 26 miles. Yeah, that seems terrible. I'm only going to run 1 mile and call it a marathon. Like, that's not how this works. But telling people about how you felt when you read and why you felt that way. If you just say, this book is a good book because I liked it. You go, that is the like that's just dumb. And it's not useful to anyone. But if you say, I really enjoyed this book, I think it's a great book. The reasons I enjoyed it are, and you explain that, then yeah, you're not really focused on the book so much as what the book created in you, but you're still supplying something that can be useful to other people. And then we can go further on down the line and go, this is what the book is doing. And we can identify things, we can isolate things, we can talk about things, and add in. And this is one of the reasons why I enjoyed this book because it did these things. You go, congratulations, you've now have something about the book, quite detailed, that any reader can look at and go, well, I like that thing and I like that thing, but I don't like that thing. And then your personal perspective and how you felt, your reading experience, is included with it. Or you can go even further and just have no one is going to know how I personally feel about this book. I am going
Mhm.
to outline everything and just say what it does. But, elements may creep through. We can do all that. And there is something wonderful and beautiful about encouraging more and more people to talk about and enjoy and discuss and get involved in reading. I am all for that. Everyone should be talking about the books that they love. Where I get slightly irked sometimes is when someone says, this is a 5-star book. I loved it. You go, right. So if you're rating the book and that rating is based on how you felt, come back to it in 10 years. You go, oh, well, now it's only a 3-star book. You go, the book hasn't changed. If the book hasn't changed, how can it have gone from 5 to 3? The text has not been altered. Nothing has changed apart from you. Therefore, what you were rating was not the book. But if you put up a thing, and instead of calling it a review of the book, Dune by Frank Herbert, my response,
Mhm.
why I felt, should you read it? You could do all sorts of things like that without calling it a review because a review is focused on the book, at least to me. And I know there are people out there who have completely different ways of thinking and doing reviews. Great. I can only give my point of view and how I feel and explain my reasoning. And that's my reasoning for this is books that I loved when I was 8, I no longer love now. Right. So obviously the book has changed. Don't think that's the reason.
But is
Books I
there a
loved
reason
when
why
I was
you don't put out too many book reviews anymore? Like I've read some that are on your blog, um, and even some early Lightbringer books you wrote up long reviews on there. But I feel like you could be our generation's Roger Ebert for the fantasy sci-fi community. That when I read a book, I or have watched a movie like earlier when I was younger, I'd always look forward to then logging onto RogerEbert.com and seeing his review, and I would often be able to find new value in things I didn't notice, or to look at things slightly differently in an interesting way, and reshape my thoughts on the movie. And I kind of desire to do that too with my reads now, but uh, the I don't have that source who has all of those points of comparison that I you know would be able to turn to. I finish a series, I read their review, and I see it through this new lens that's illuminating. Um, I I I wish almost that you put out, your reviews for everything you read, and we would have that to look back on. And
I stopped when I was doing reviews. Because I was reviewing for some academic and
Mhm.
sort of academic adjacent things. And I was doing that and I was enjoying it. And I had the time to do it and I was reading a lot of books and it tied in with what I was researching. So it was a very economical use of my time and I enjoyed talking about it. But when I started the YouTube channel, lots of people talk about how they feel about books and they review books.
Mhm.
And I went, there's already a load of stuff out there. I don't need to add to that. It's well catered to. But I want to talk about the things that I am actually interested in because this is a hobby for me. It's fun for me. And reviewing has become less and less fun
Mm.
for me. And I wasn't enjoying it as much anymore because the things that I was fascinated in watching film and watching TV and reading books, I was becoming more and more interested in the narrative elements and those sorts of things, and less interested in consumer-esque reviews and going,
Mm.
"You should watch this," because I was more interested in deconstructing it. And yeah, you could use a lot of that information for a review, but I didn't want to write the review. Uh,
Yeah.
I fell out of love with doing it, and
Oh, yeah.
the fun I had was talking about, you know, recently I had a chat with Philip about Dune Part Two, and we were talking about elements of Dune Part Two that we enjoyed, like talking about our experience because we're not
Mhm.
reviewing the film,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
then
yeah.
talking about how we understood various aspects of it because it's a discussion about what we saw, and it's not being framed as a review. And I think I have one pseudo review on my YouTube channel, and that was to point out you can actually go through a whole load of things and point out stuff that is objective about a book because you are being descriptive about what the book is doing rather than subjective about whether or not you enjoyed it. And it was just a simple illustration that this
Mhm.
is doable, and there will always be elements of subjectivity because people are going, oh, but that's subjective. Like yes, but our perception of reality is subjective. How we choose to privilege, weight, and
Mhm.
organize information and the order in which we deliver it is subjective. That whether our knowledge about what we are studying is subjective. Like uh, our perception of reality is rooted in the
Oh,
subject and how our eyes see, how our nose smells, how our mouth tastes, how our ears hear, and how our brain processes that information. And our brain is not the same as anyone else's brain. That's just how reality is.
yeah.
But there's a difference between talking about elements in a book and categorizing it and comparing it to other things and going, I liked.
Yeah.
Like, not all subjectivity is equally subjective. Not all objectivity is equally objective because we're not going to the absolute binary extremes. It's not a dyad, it is a spectrum. And that's just how I feel about it. But there there are people on the internet, there are people I know who have read so much more than me, that know so much
Mm.
more than me. And they're the people I turn to and go, like, what did you think of that? And they'll talk about it. I go, oh yeah, I'm gonna hate that. Or they might go, oh, I really dislike that thing. I go, why? And they explain why. You go, oh, you go and buy that. Because, I know them and they're incredibly good at explaining what it is they see, how they see it, how it functions, how it works. They're the people I learn from. And they are fantastic and they are brilliant. And they're the people who, if they write a review, I pay attention to it. I might not agree with them. I might have radically different tastes to them. But I know when I read their review, I will come out A, probably slightly smarter, but
Mhm.
B, knowing whether or not that is something I want to pick up because it is not about whether they liked it or didn't like it. They actually isolate what the thing is doing. And, over time, we get to know ourselves better. We get to know our tastes better. We get to know what we like and don't like. So when people say, oh, I don't like tropes, no, you do. Like, you literally do like tropes. Um, you don't like when they're done badly. Well, yeah, that's what I meant. I don't like when they're done badly. It's like, what of anything do you like when it is done badly?
Yeah.
It's
But even just providing a point of comparison of a book's kind of prose style like you did with, Guy Gavriel to Jenny Wirtz. So I haven't read any Wirtz. I have, Curse of the Mystery sitting on the shelf patiently waiting for its turn, but I've
well,
always been
they're
kind of
not the
thinking,
same.
maybe it's not the style that's for me, but now that I've enjoyed Guy Gavriel and you're making that comparison and the kind of attention to language and the elegance and the prose style, now I'm thinking, "Oh, maybe Wars of Light and Shadow would be something I could enjoy," and I'm more inclined to pick it up now.
Well, let me give you an example of something. So, like here's a very simple thing, because I know there are people out there who still think, oh, the prose doesn't matter. I'm just interested in the story. And you go, but it's a book. How it is written is literally communicating this. They go, yeah, but it doesn't matter. Okay, so there was on the Fantasy Thinker, Jared. He had a small section from one of Wirtz's books, from the Wars of Light and Shadow, and it was a character opening the door to a bar, a raucous tavern at night. And the thing is, so the character opens the door, and the character is immediately hit in the face by this general smell.
Mm,
So the first half of the sentence is this overwhelming, in your face smell. And then the second half of the sentence was one particular smell that got picked out. Then the next thing was the sound hitting the ears. And it was this general cacophony. And then a specific sound that gets picked out. So you get the general impression and then a specific thing for us to focus on. Then the third thing was how the scene looked. Because
mhm,
by this stage, the door was all the way open. So if you think of when you're opening the door, you could probably reverse sound and smell. Like you could probably do them either way around because as
mm,
you open the door, the air is going to come out and the sound is going to get louder. So if the air comes out and you start smelling it before and then the sound gets louder as you open the door. So if you think of that sequence, sound and smell are going to be very close together. But sight, you still have to open the door all the way. And again, the general sight of this chaos that's inside, and then a specific thing. And then the character becomes more situated. We get more details. But those first three run in that sequence. Now, if you'd started with, they opened the door, they were greeted with a sight, then they are greeted with the sound, then they are greeted with the smell. You go, why put it in that order? That feels out of place because that means they opened the door, they stepped inside, they saw everything, and then they smelled it, and
mm,
then they heard it. That's not how the sequence makes sense. So the very prose on the page, the order of the information is actually important to how it was done. And with that, establishing the general impression, because quite often when you open a door to a new scene, you get this wide sort of, it's all chaos. And then your brain starts picking up individual details. And you go, that is reflected each time. So Wirtz in her writing paid attention not only to the
mm,
sequence of how the senses are being affected when you open the door to a noisy bar, paid attention to the fact that how we access our senses is we get a general overall impression and then we pick out
mm,
specifics as our brain has time to process it, and puts that in a sequence which then situates the reader, immerses the reader in this sequence. you know, that attention to detail is why the prose matters, because if it was just you open the door and there was a raucous scene inside, you go, yeah, you're getting across the general sense, but you're not making it as immersive. And the thing, maybe you don't want it to be immersive, but to say that the prose doesn't matter is ignoring the fact that it does. It is literally how the story is being communicated and stuck into your brain. If you have, oh, I'm a 1,000-year-old vampire, and let me tell you about my time growing up in medieval Europe, and it's so you go to this whole thing and people are speaking in modern day vernacular. You're like, does that sound right? Did, is it evoking the place? And no, I will say, there are ways to do this. There are techniques that you can do. But if it was just, oh, well, I wrote because the prose doesn't matter, it does. Because how else are you going to convey that we are
yeah,
now in medieval Europe? No, you're obviously, if you're writing in English, you're going to do it in English. You're not going to have it in Latin or various German dialects or whatever. But you you use the words on the page to create the thing. Oh, but dialogue's different. But dialogue is part of it. If every chapter started with 2 paragraphs of physical description, you'd go, right, can you change it up a bit? Like every chapter starts this way. This is now a boring pattern. Why not have dialogue starting one,
mhm,
then immediately move into description, or start in the middle of an action sequence and then build things out, like variation. But again, that's about the prose. That's about how the writing is communicating things. And that's more of a structural element. But it's still about the prose. If you're intending to write for an adult audience, right, I'm communicating with adults. I'm going to make assumptions about their level of literacy.
Mhm.
If I am writing to a teenage audience, I'm going to be thinking of teenage psychology and language that they're familiar with and story elements that they're familiar with as teenagers. Not that they are dumb, but they have yet to achieve the same level of general experience that an adult audience has generally. These things are taken into account in how you tell the story. And if I write as if my audience has an IQ of 80 and I explain everything, then for me, I feel I'm being spoken down to. That the author
Mhm.
doesn't trust that I am smart enough to pick these things up. And I don't enjoy reading that. But if I'm listening to an audiobook, which is for me a much more passive experience, I listen to an audiobook while I am doing something else. Then having something in a much simpler and lower level of diction, a much simpler vocabulary, with a more straightforward, blunt, direct style, where there is structural repetition, where characters recap and explain and talk about the thing that just happened in case you missed the thing that just happened. Like that works really well for an audiobook for me because I listen to audiobooks when I am doing something else and not concentrating on it. It does not work when I am sitting down to read because then I feel that I'm being talked down to. So, like all of these are dependent on the very language that is on the page,
Mhm.
the prose. And if that prose is altered in different ways, it creates different effects. That's why the prose is at the heart of all of this. And if we want to talk knowledgeably about books, Harlan Ellison once said, now Harlan Ellison had a bit of a reputation. And he once said, no, you're not entitled to your opinion. You're entitled to your informed opinion. I think that's a little harsh, but it highlights something important that when we are speaking about things, that we acknowledge our level of understanding and we don't simply insist like I've read 100 books, therefore I know a lot.
Mhm.
I've eaten hundreds of meals. It doesn't mean that I am going to be a great critic of meals because I don't fundamentally understand cuisine. I don't understand the balance of these different spices and seasonings and different cooking techniques.
Mhm.
There's a whole load of technique to it that would be useful to understand if I'm going to be evaluating the meal in front of me. So I don't go off and pretend to be a restaurant critic, but I still will tell people I love that restaurant because I love the food there. The food does these things. We still encourage the discussion about it, but we are aware of our limitations.
Mm.
And that's the important thing. We should be having discussions across all levels of understanding of literature and encouraging everyone and informing everyone, and that we all learn together. That is my dream and my goal and the thing that I love. But insisting, no, I am here and the author should meet me where I am. It's like, does the author know that you exist? Probably not. Why should the author write specifically for you? But I'm a fan of books. So am I. Should they write specifically for me? If they wrote specifically for me, would you enjoy the book? What makes you so special that the author should conform to your expectations and desires and biases
Yeah.
and preferences? What makes you the one individual in the world that gets to decide this for everyone else? And it's difficult. We're constantly on that. We universalize because it's how we understand. And we go, oh well, because I saw it this way, and this way is clearly the right way to see it because that's how I saw it and I understand it, then everyone must do that. And sometimes we just need to take that step back because we can all be wrong. We're all
Mhm.
human and fallible and you know prone to error. That's the nature of who we are. But it can be very difficult to realize when you are wrong.
Amen. Yeah, that is, even if you can intellectually understand, it still can be difficult to admit it to yourself, like, "Oh, I might have not understood that exactly." or um, maybe not understood the technique behind something or the context or the reception it might have with other people. Yeah, it can be hard to get outside of ourselves. But thank you, AP. I know you got to run and do some editing today, and but thank you for this chat. I feel like I've furthered my understanding of all of these things, and through
I'm
today,
so
but also
sorry.
through watching your videos over the years. You're helping other people enter the conversation and understand more of just what's going on in narrative, and
Th-
it's so interesting when we peel away some of the outer layer.
Let's be honest about this. I'm a grumpy old man basically yelling about the kids on his lawn. That is all I am, except I'm doing it to a camera. I'm just grumpy. Um, but thank you very much for this chat, man. I'm sorry I ramble and then
No, that
go
was
off on.
perfect. That was great. That was perfect. And that's I love rambling. So yeah, thank you for coming out and chatting about all this with me. And yeah, for everyone else out there, hope you enjoyed it. And we'll see you later. We'll see you again.